Tribunal sentence you to death by firing squad. March him out.
June 16, 1979. A man stands in the early morning air of Accra. No uniform today, no medals, no decorations, no gold braid on the shoulder that once told a room exactly how much power had just walked in. He is standing in front of a firing squad. His name is Ignatius Kutu Acheampong. 7 years ago, this man ran Ghana. He commanded the armed forces now preparing to kill him. He trusted these men. He rose among these men. He gave his entire life to this world. And this world is about to take that life back. The rifles come up. 1972. 15 years out of British colonial rule. Still finding its footing. Still figuring out what kind of country it wants to be. The founding father, Kwame Nkrumah, is already gone. Removed in 1966 by a military coup while he was abroad on a peace mission. The man who built the nation, overthrown by the institution he armed and funded. That irony never quite leaves the national memory. After Nkrumah, Ghana stumbles. A civilian government under Kofi Bija comes to power in 1969. Democratic. Elected. Genuine hopes attached to it. But Bija inherits a broken economy and a currency bleeding out. In January 1972, his government devalues the cedi by 44%. One announcement, one morning, felt immediately in every market, every household, every pocket in the country. The soldiers are watching. They are always watching. And one officer, the commander of the 1st Infantry Brigade in Accra, is not just watching. He is calculating. His name is Ignatius Kutu Acheampong. Not the most senior officer in Ghana. Not the obvious candidate for anything. But in this particular moment, what matters is not rank. What matters is who moves first. 9 days after the devaluation, Acheampong moves. January 13th, 1972. The coup is swift, clean, almost bloodless. Bish's government is dissolved. The constitution is suspended. The National Redemption Council, chaired by Acheampong, assumes control of Ghana. By morning, a country of millions wakes up under new management. And something unexpected happens. They are not entirely against it. The crowds that gather in the days after the coup are not crowds of fear. They are something closer to cautious relief. Ghana in 1972 has been disappointed enough times that a new face carrying a new promise finds a population willing, carefully, guardedly, to give that promise a little room. Acheampong reads this correctly, and in those early months, he plays the moment with real skill. His first move is to repudiate Ghana's inherited foreign debt, not restructure it, not negotiate it down, repudiate it entirely. It is a bold, almost confrontational act. The international financial community is alarmed. Ordinary Ghanaians feel something different. They feel dignity. But the policy that truly captures the national imagination is simpler than debt repudiation. It is called Operation Feed Yourself. The idea is as direct as its name. Ghana has fertile land and a deep farming tradition. But the country has drifted into dependency on imported food. Acheampong's government launches an aggressive push to reverse that drift. Grow your own food. Feed your own people. Urban workers are encouraged to farm plots on the side. Schools incorporate agriculture into their curriculum. The message connects to something real, a pride in self-sufficiency, a refusal of dependency, a vision of a Ghana that does not go begging to the world for its bread. It works. In those early years, agricultural output rises. Markets are not empty. Families are eating. And the man behind the campaign is photographed in those markets. He speaks in local idioms. He shows up at community events like someone who genuinely remembers where he came from. Because he does. Acheampong was born in Kumasi in 1931. No great wealth behind him. No family connections opening doors. He rose through the military on merit and ambition. The only institution that offered a man of his background a real path upward. In the early years of his government, that origin story is a genuine asset. He is not an elite talking down to common people. He is a Ghanaian who came from them. And he has not yet, forgotten it. Inside the armed forces, he consolidates carefully. He rewards loyalty. He places trusted officers in key positions. The Supreme Military Council, which replaces the National Redemption Council in 1975, gives the appearance of collective leadership. But Acheampong is the center. Always the center. And for a moment, a real, documented, genuinely felt moment in Ghanaian life, there is hope attached to that center. Then the math stops working. By 1976, two forces are quietly tearing the economy apart. Not 10 problems. Not a complicated web of policy failures. 2. The first is inflation. Prices are rising faster than wages. Faster than government policy can chase them. faster than the official statistics are willing to admit publicly. The Sadi, which Acheampong had refused to further devalue after 1972, a point of national pride, is now deeply disconnected from what things actually cost on the ground. There is the official price of things, and there is the real price of things. Those two numbers are no longer close. Into that gap rushes the black market. Informal, unregulated, completely honest about the prices that the formal economy is pretending don't exist. The second force is shortage. The shelves begin to empty. Cooking oil, soap, sugar, flour, not luxuries, survival items. Items Ghanaian families structure their days around. First they become expensive, then scarce. Then they disappear from formal markets entirely, reappearing at doubled or tripled prices through channels the government calls illegal and ordinary people call the only option left. Now pause on that for a second. A government that came to power promising to feed the nation is presiding over empty shelves. That gap between the promise of 1972 and the reality of 1976 is not a small gap. It is the kind of gap that changes how people look at a leader. Not just disappointment, something more permanent, something that does not recover. And into that tension, Acheampong sends soldiers to the markets, to stand in front of women selling tomatoes, to enforce price controls that the economy cannot support. The market women, the backbone of everyday Ghanaian commerce, the women who kept food moving through every political upheaval since independence, are now facing men with rifles telling them to charge less than their goods cost to source. The anger this produces is not abstract. It is the fury of people already drowning being told by someone on dry land that they are swimming wrong. Meanwhile, at the top of the government, a different economy is operating. Corruption, which began as a whisper, a rumor, a thing people suspected but could not prove, is hardening into something visible. Stories circulate about officials enriching themselves through contracts and cocoa revenues, about the growing distance between the self-reliance rhetoric on the radio and the actual lifestyles of the men preaching it. Acheampong hears the criticism, but the circle of honest counsel around him has narrowed. Men who would have delivered hard truths in 1973 have learned, over 6 years, that hard truths are not what the chairman rewards. What gets rewarded is agreement, reassurance, the smoothing over of difficult realities with comfortable interpretations. The information reaching him is filtered, managed, shaped by people with reasons to keep him comfortable. He is making decisions about a country he can no longer see clearly. And then he makes the mistake that costs him everything the shortages had not already taken. He calls it union government. The year is 1977. Ghana needs a path back to civilian rule. The public wants it. International pressure demands it. Acheampong knows this. So he proposes what he describes as a uniquely Ghanaian solution. A hybrid system. Military, police, and civilians sharing power together. No political parties. No conventional elections. A new kind of democracy, suited, he says, to African conditions. His critics have a shorter description. They call it Acheampong deciding to stay in power forever with extra steps. The Ghana Bar Association comes out against it publicly. University lecturers, medical associations, students fill the streets of Accra and Kumasi. These are not outside agitators. These are Ghana's professionals, the people who had invested most in the idea of a functioning Ghanaian state. And they are saying, loudly, consistently, without apology, that they no longer believe this man. A referendum is held in 1978. The government announces it passes. The opposition announces the results were fabricated. Nobody with credibility comes forward to defend the process as clean. On the streets, the hope of 1972 is not just faded. It has curdled. And inside the military leadership, senior officers are making their own calculations. Those calculations are almost finished. Here is the truth about military governments that the men who lead them almost always learn too late. They do not fall because the public is furious. Publics can be furious for years. They can protest, march, publish, demonstrate, and a government backed by armed forces can outlast all of it. Because it has guns and the public does not. What brings a military government down is never the noise outside. It is the silence inside. When the senior officers stop defending their chairman in private conversations. When they start calculating what their own futures look like if he stays. When loyalty, which was never unconditional, quietly reaches its limit and begins running in a different direction. That is the moment the floor disappears. By early 1978, the floor under Acheampong is gone. The men of the Supreme Military Council are watching the inflation, the empty shelves, the unique of disaster, the street protests that cannot be suppressed without making everything worse. They are not watching as troubled loyalists. They are watching as men who have made a decision. General Frederick Akufo moves on July 5, 1978. No tanks in the streets. No dramatic siege. No public confrontation. What happens is quieter and more devastating. Conversations. Then very firm conversations. Then a meeting where the number of men in the room and where they are standing makes the outcome clear before a word is spoken. Acheampong is told he will be retiring. He has no move left. The loyalty he spent 6 years building, the positions granted, the promotions awarded, the trust extended, has been redirected. Quietly, collectively, he discovers, in that room, that the armed forces hierarchy had been running a separate calculation all along. And the calculation came up against him. He is stripped of power and permitted to retire. No prison. Not yet. He becomes a former head of state living inside the country he once controlled. Think carefully about what those months feel like. He is recognizable everywhere he goes. Some people look away. Some look through him. The men who removed him are in the newspapers, on the radio, at the functions he used to host. He has no platform, no position, no way to respond, no way to tell his side. A man who defined himself entirely through rank and authority, who understood himself through the structure that told him exactly what he was and what he was worth, is now outside that structure entirely. He waits. He tells himself the informal code will hold, that former heads of state are not prosecuted in Ghana, that there is a rough gentleman's agreement inside the military establishment that protects men of his former stature. He believes it. He waits. He has no idea what is coming. May 1979. A 31-year-old Air Force flight lieutenant named Jerry John Rawlings attempts a coup. It fails. He is arrested, court-martialed, placed in a military detention cell. And then the junior ranks break him out. The armed forces are not fracturing at the edges. They are fracturing along the seam between those who benefited from military rule and those who did not. Senior officers live in a different Ghana than the junior ranks. The colonels and generals have access to contracts, to resources, to the informal economy that power creates around itself. The lower ranks go home to the same neighborhoods as the people standing in queues for soap. They feel the shortages. They watch the same shelves empty. They have been storing that observation, quietly, carefully, in the way that people store things they cannot yet act on. Rawlings gives them something to act on. June 4, 1979. The Armed Forces Revolutionary Council takes power. The Akufo government is swept away. And Rawlings comes on the radio with one word: accountability. He does not say it in the careful, modulated language of a politician managing expectations. He says it like a man who has decided that the gap between what Ghana was promised and what Ghana received is not a policy problem. It is a moral one. He announces investigations into former leaders. He makes clear that retirement is not immunity. The informal code, the one Acheampong had been quietly counting on, is not a code this government recognizes. Acheampong is arrested. And then, in a detail that history almost seems to have arranged deliberately, General Akufo, the man who removed Acheampong, is also arrested. The man who forced the retirement. The man who believed he had cleanly separated himself from the previous era. The man who thought removing Acheampong was an act of institutional correction rather than just another move in the same game. He is now in an adjacent cell, waiting for the same tribunal. The armed forces hierarchy did not distinguish between the man who fell from power and the man who pushed him. It is consuming both of them at once. The tribunal is not built for nuance. It is built for verdicts. The charges against Acheampong center on corruption, wealth accumulated far beyond what his official salary could explain, abuse of public resources, the economic mismanagement that turned a promising early government into a national emergency. He maintains throughout that he served Ghana, that the failures were structural, global, not personal theft, that the men sitting in judgment of him have no standing to judge him, that this process, whatever it is dressed as, is not justice. The tribunal reaches its verdict without extended deliberation. Guilty. The sentence is death. He is 50 years old. June 16, 1979. We are back where we started. The pale morning sky over Accra, the heavy air, the ground under Acheampong's feet, Ghanaian soil, the same soil he once commanded. Akufo is brought out too. They are here together. The two men whose rivalry defined 1978, whose relationship was built on mutual calculation and eventual betrayal, are now standing in the same place, facing the same thing. Whatever existed between them, the ambition, the positioning, the moment in 1978 when Akufo forced Acheampong out, none of it carries any weight now. It has been flattened entirely by what is about to happen to both of them. The firing squad assembles. The men holding the rifles are products of the same Ghanaian armed forces that produced Acheampong. Same institution, same flag, same oath once spoken. Different moment, different calculation. The shots are fired. It is over in seconds. Ghana buries Acheampong and moves forward. Or tries to. The deep irony, the one history seems almost too deliberate in arranging, is that Rawlings himself would seize power again in 1981. A second coup. He governed Ghana for nearly 2 decades before overseeing a democratic transition in 1992 that finally returned constitutional rule to the country. He died in 2020, remembered by many as a foundational figure in Ghana's democracy, the man who eventually gave power back. History rarely delivers clean moral accounts. Rawlings demanded accountability from others in 1979 and then, 2 years later, stepped outside constitutional authority again. He was not simply a hypocrite. He was a man inside a structure that kept producing the same outcomes regardless of who stood at the top of it. That is a more troubling observation than hypocrisy, because it means the problem was never really about the individual men. Acheampong's legacy inside Ghana remains genuinely contested. There are Ghanaians old enough to remember Operation Feed Yourself with real warmth. A moment when the country felt like it was attempting something. People who believe he deserved a real legal process, not a tribunal assembled by men who had just staged another coup and needed the verdict quickly. There are others, equally Ghanaian, equally sincere, who remember the empty shelves, the soldiers in the markets, the women harassed for charging prices the economy demanded, who believe accountability, even imperfect accountability, was not nothing. Both positions are held by people with legitimate memories. Neither fully contains the other. Here is the question this story will not answer for you, because it genuinely cannot. Was what happened to Ignatius Kutu Acheampong on June 16, 1979, justice? The men who signed his death warrant would say yes. He ran a corrupt government. He caused measurable suffering. He reached for permanent power through a process the country rejected. He was tried, found guilty, and punished. That is what accountability looks like when it finally arrives. But consider what delivered it. The tribunal that convicted him was assembled by men who took power 4 days earlier through armed insurrection. They had no constitution behind them, no electoral mandate, no legal authority beyond the force that put them in the room. They were soldiers, installed by a coup, trying a former leader for corruption, in a process that wore the shape of law without the substance of it. So ask the harder question, was this justice? Or was it consolidation dressed as justice? A new state authority structure removing the previous generation because living former leaders are always a liability. Because a man like Acheampong, still present, still recognizable, still capable of becoming a symbol, is a question mark the new government cannot afford to leave open. Executing him closes the question. If that is even partly true, and the speed of the tribunal strongly suggests it might be, then what happened on June 16, 1979 was not a clean break from the cycle Acheampong represented. It was the cycle continuing, with different men, different justifications, the same violence, this time wearing the language of accountability rather than the language of national salvation. Acheampong rose through the armed forces. He used the armed forces to seize power. He was removed by the armed forces, tried by the armed forces, killed by the armed forces. The same institution. From the very first step to the very last one. He believed it was his foundation, not knowing it was his grave. And the question that outlives him, the one Ghana and every country that has watched a general declare himself a savior must eventually sit with, is not really about Acheampong at all. It is about what happens when the institution meant to defend the state becomes the state itself. About whether a power structure built on force is capable of producing justice, or whether every verdict it delivers is, at its core, just another form of force, dressed differently, aimed at a different man, but unchanged. The rifles fired on June 16, 1979. The question they left behind is still being asked. In Accra, in history, In every country where the men who promise to fix things become the thing that needs fixing.